Good morning. Let's just stay in that atmosphere right where you are. Let's just take a moment and pause. Just open up our hearts to the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, a Father who loves us, is drawing us closer to himself every day, making us more like him. In that song we just sang, there was a line that says, "He welcomed me." He welcomed me. Today we're talking about worship, and right from this moment right here where you feel just like you do, I just want to teach you just a little something about worship right here. He welcomed me. He welcomed you. And, you know, sometimes I don't always feel like just kind of walking in and just like raising my hands and singing a song, right? But when I think for just a minute, it doesn't take very long, when I just think about who I used to be, when I just think about maybe how I was this week, when I just think about even how I was yesterday, and I just think about a holy God who loves me and who welcomes me, knowing everything he knows about my heart, then that feeling right there is worship. And then I can move from that place right there where I see who I am, who I was, who I used to be, and what he's making me into now, and who he is, and what he's done for me. What he's done for you. Some of the testimonies I've heard, even just in the last week, what he's done for you. And I just, that's worship, family. And so right here where we are, can we just let our hearts just settle on him right now? Let's just focus our hearts on Jesus. The Bible calls him the author and perfecter of our faith. You're not the perfecter of your faith. Did you know that? You can't be. He is. He's the author and perfecter of our faith. And when I think about what he's done for me, who I used to be, man, it positions my heart to worship in a way that no song, no lyric ever could. Amen? Okay. That wasn't the sermon. So are the Eagles over here and the Chiefs over here? Which is it? Is it like, well, I thought, I'm just looking at, I see a lot more red shirts over here. Wait. I actually just found out who was playing like a couple days ago. I couldn't care any less. But I know that many of you are here just because of that today. God hears your prayers. Seahawks. Yeah. I see you, Seahawks. I see you. Isn't God faithful? Isn't God good? I was going to start off, Trevor's been talking for a few weeks about his running streak, and I was going to start off talking about, but I can talk about, I do have a really cool milestone in this regard, and that is like I'm 417 days straight, not running. I run when chased by dangerous things. So that's the extent of my running. I know, I just lost like a quarter of you. You guys were like, anyway, it doesn't matter. I won't make fun of the runners in the room. My wife is one of them, so I won't make fun of you. So we have been talking about Sabbath. And today we're wrapping up this series on Sabbath. And with this final point, and that's worship. We began talking about just practicing the way of Jesus. We've learned that we're not, the discipleship, being disciples is really just being apprentices to Jesus. We're following him, we're learning his ways, and we've been growing in that. And we learned how the progression so far has been that Sabbath means to stop, to cease, to pause. And then our Sabbath should include rest and delight. And today we're talking about worship. But we haven't just been talking about Sabbath like as a principle. We've been talking about practicing it. We've been talking about practicing the Sabbath. And one of the points that was made last Sunday is that we need to try things and see what works and to adjust, because when we look at Sabbath, when we zoom out and we just take honestly a grace-filled approach to Sabbath, we see that we have 52 opportunities a year to try things and make it right. You have 52 chances every year just to try something new, incorporate something else, take out what's not working, and to practice Sabbath and see what works and what doesn't. When we talk about Sabbath, I want to acknowledge that there are a few ways to begin this practice. The traditional Friday at sundown to Saturday sundown, that's a traditional Sabbath. Or how about Sundays? That's what my family has been experimenting with in just the last 2 weeks. Or midweek, if that's what your schedule allows for. And then these last few weeks, I just wanted to just say briefly, like I think when I started this series, I just said that my family has no Sabbath practice. And so we've just been working on things. And by working, I mean working on things, trying things out, practicing. We've been practicing. And the last few weeks, we've been practicing doing Sabbath, and we began as a family that had no specific practice, and now we're doing Sabbath on Sundays right now. So we tried 3 hours the first Sunday after church, and Sunday is a work day for me. I'm a pastor, right? So but I'm here as a minister, and so that's part of my role and my calling. And so walking in my calling, that can happen on the Sabbath. So we're taking after church Sunday. The first week we did 3 hours. And then last week we did 4 hours, and we're working on the same time frame again today, because I think we can fit in 4 hours before something happens this afternoon. I don't know. We'll see. But we're just trying things. And the last few weeks we've talked about this progression of Sabbath practice of stop, rest, and delight. So today we zero in on our final component of Sabbath, arguably the most important, and that's worship. The Sabbath is a day for worship. So let's read together in Genesis chapter 2, verses 2 and 3. This is kind of a source verse for us today, just to say, okay, this is what we're talking about. So Genesis chapter 2, verse 2 and 3, reading from the NIV today. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested. On the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy. Because on it, he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. God blessed it. Blessed is to make happy. He blessed the day. God took this day and made it happy. And then what did he do? He blessed it and made it happy, and then he made it holy. He made this day two things, happy and holy. Holy is to be unique or set apart for God's purposes. Holy is unique or set apart for God's specific purpose. You know, growing up, we have, as a kid, we had this set of cupboards at my parents' house. It's weird for me to talk about. They still live in this house. So I always say my parents' house, but it was my home growing up, right? So we had this. The whole house had been completely remodeled, but somehow in the middle of this house, they have a pretty old home, and it had this. It still has this counter and cupboard area. It's a built-in hutch, right? And it has that yellow plastic glass in it, like that's all, so you can't really see what's in there except the shadows, and it's pretty 70s and awesome. And the wood is like super dark, and then the countertop of the hutch is yellow Formica. And so, yeah, it's sweet. But growing up, we had a term for this, and it's still called this to this day. If you use this term, anyone in my family understands what you're talking about. The yellow counter. That's what it's called. This one space in our home. It's just a little room. It's actually where the furnace, it's like it used to be the back porch of the house, and then when there was an addition added on, it was just like this little room that's in the middle. So at the yellow counter and the hutch around it contains all of the glassware, all of the there's this little set of china that my mom has. There's some pieces in there from my great-grandparents and grandparents, and there's some really beautiful dishes that, like maybe for Christmas that have holly on them and things like that. And in that, and a bunch of really nice wine glasses and that kind of stuff. And everything in that cupboard is set aside for a really special day. So during the week, I have 3 siblings, and so during the week, we just ate off of, the plastic stuff that was in the cupboard, and, the plastic cups and things like that. We just used the regular silverware that was in the drawer in the kitchen, and during the week, we ate all of our normal meals. Just regular meal, we ate just on regular stuff in the cupboard. But on a special day, on a birthday, on Christmas, if we had guests over, if someone came to visit, my mom said, go to the yellow counter and pull the dishes out. And when you went to the yellow counter to pull the dishes out, you knew, well, who's coming over? What's happening today? It's someone's birthday, it's a holiday, something different was happening. What was in that cupboard was set apart specifically for special things. You might say it was holy, which is odd for me to think about the yellow counter being holy, but it was holy. Everything in there was set apart for a reason. There were dishes in there, glassware in there, silver in there, things that were used, candlesticks in there that you pulled out when things were getting cool and awesome. They were set aside for a special purpose. Holy is a super Christianized word that we use. It gets thrown around a fair amount. But here in Genesis, this is the first time, in Genesis chapter 2, this is the first time holy is used to describe anything. Genesis chapter 2, right here that we just read. And what's it referring to? It's not referring to dishes. It's not even referring to the temple. It's not even referring to God. It's referring to time. It's referring to a day. God says that this day, this time, God makes a time holy. He makes a time holy. It's used here to refer to time, to a day, not a holy place, not a holy mountain, not a holy chunk of property, not like, hey, this is where things are. No, it's referring to a day, a specific amount of time to rest from work. God makes it holy and God makes it happy. On our Sabbath, above everything else, what we're talking about, the things we do, the things we don't do, our expectations, the stopping, the resting, the delighting, above all of that, our Sabbath is designed to reorient our lives toward God and His ways. It's a day to say, God, we worship you, we love you, and not just by singing. Singing's great, songs are great, but worship by actually setting aside time. Time. It's important to recognize that you will worship. You will worship. I will worship. The question is not if we're going to worship. Everybody worships. The question is simply what or who you will worship. What will you elevate? What will you exalt? What will you lift up? And what's the most expensive thing a human has? Time. Time. Time is that little clock that's always just ticking in the background of your life and my life. That's why when we refer to doing something that's like, that might seem frivolous or might seem, we call it a waste of time. Time can be wasted. But time is that thing that you and I get no more of. We get no more of it. We have some, and that's all we get. You can't buy more. You can't earn more. Aren't you glad you came to church today? You're going to die. Time. Time someday for all of us will be over. Time is that one thing that you and I have that is more valuable than anything else we could possess. No stuff, no home, no property, nothing is worth more than our time. So our first week, we talked about stop. Stop work. Turn off your phone. Stop. We also need to stop judging ourselves too harshly for what our Sabbath has or has not been. Giving ourselves over to God's goodness, delighting in his rich love and surrendering to his grace. And we're choosing to say, like Jesus did, that God made the Sabbath for us, not the other way around. He didn't make us to fulfill a Sabbath. He made the Sabbath for us. He designed Sabbath for you and I. We desire to honor God in it. If your desire is to honor God with Sabbath, you're headed in the right direction. You're doing it right. If you're just headed toward like, hey God, as a household, as a person, in our marriage or in our family, whatever your living situation is, I want to honor you with my time. Would you lead me in Sabbath? Would you show me you're on the right track? But Sabbath is not simply a day off. There are elements to the Sabbath that once we stop everything else, we can implement the particular elements that orchestrate a day of rest, delight, and worship. And you'd be amazed how much space is made in your brain when you stop. When you rest your eyes, when you rest your neck, and you put down phones and close computers and devices and put it all away. I used to work from home, and I had a pretty good system working from home of closing down my office and moving into real life outside of my home office. And I had an okay system, but it's amazing at how easily work could sneak back in when this was around. Even if I had, I closed my computer, I turned it off, I logged out, I closed the door, but if this was still, I could still sneak back into work or, looking at my, hey, financial stuff or economics, anything work-wise, I could look at it and check an email just real quick, right? It's amazing how that can sneak in. So part of stopping for us, for our family, and I mentioned this before, is turning off devices, putting phones away for our Sabbath time. And I'm not going to get into this today. And if your family already has a tech plan, that's awesome. If you're brand new, maybe you have a young family, or you want to just revamp how technology is in your household. The Tech Wise Family by Andy Crouch is an incredible book. It's a lot. I don't mean money. It's a lot of information. So if you already have a tech plan, I wouldn't just go get it and put everything into practice. I'd take it easy because he has a lot to back him up, and he's right. But these are in the bookstore today for $5. So if you want to grab one, you can. Rihanna has them out there. And I'm not going to dive into that, but it's an excellent book. And I realized rereading it this time, I don't think I finished it the first time I read it. But this time when I read it, I gleaned a lot more information to support where my heart was at. And so if that's you, great. If it's not, great. But stop is the first step. And when you stop, you can see the choice that you have. This is important. When you stop, you can see the choice that you have to rest and delight and worship. See, we kind of want to think we'll just rest, delight, and worship without stopping, but it's not till you stop, till you Sabbath, till you put the brakes on and give that space that you actually discover what that is. Rest, delight, and worship. We like to and you can incorporate rest, delight, and worship into your regular life, into your 6 days too. You could do that after you could get off work and put an album on, Spotify and just worship. That's great, but Sabbath is when you stop to do it. Sabbath is when you stop to do that thing. And there's a reason behind it. So we stop. Trevor has mentioned that Sabbath is like a container. Once we stop, Sabbath is this container, and it's like a room. And stopping empties the room. It empties that container of time, but it's not meant to stay empty. Sabbath is not empty, it's filled with rest. It's filled with delight, and it's filled with worship. So the next thing is rest. We literally rest. That's exactly what that word means. Sleep in, take a nap, go to bed early, put your feet up. As we say in our house, rest your eyes, right? Daddy's just resting his eyes. Anyway, rest your eyes, take a break, put your feet up, take a nap, rest. Your body needs it probably more than you think it does. And you probably think it does. Rest. So next is delight. I'm cruising through these because we're going to wrap up with worship. Next is delight. The elements that you include in your Sabbath is what brings this portion delight to life. That what you include in your Sabbath, so you stop and you rest, and then what the things that you include, the things that you do on Sabbath are what bring delight. In practicing the way, the resources that we've talked about and referred to, and if you click on your tap disc in front of you, and if you go on our website, you can see links to practicing the way resources. That's what we're pulling many of these concepts from. But they talk about the concept specifically of pleasure stacking. Pleasure stacking. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's things that I like, and I'm going to put them all on this day. It's things that and that seems really, it's some people would call this a cheat day. We would just call it Sabbath. We'd call it Sabbath. I'm going to move things I like to this day. It's been said about Sabbath that a lot of people struggle with feasting because we struggle with fasting. We struggle with feasting often because we struggle with fasting. We want all the things all the time, and so they're not special. Right? We want all the things all the time. So then, it's not a big deal when we, and what I want to say about this concept of pleasure stacking is just include things you delight in your Sabbath, that bring you delight and joy in your Sabbath day. Maybe take them out of your Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Put them on your Saturday or Sunday. Just take the things you like and put them on that day. That will help bring delight to your Sabbath. So this is where feasting comes in. A meal you really enjoy. Set the table with actual dishes. Light a candle. Put on some great music. Maybe it's a day to enjoy a delicious dessert. For us, our prep has been to finish our chores and work and to-do lists on Saturday. And like I said, we're just now getting into this. We're practicing. And then meal prep and do everything that we can do to get either a meal into the oven or the crock pot or plan the meal for the next day for Sunday when we get home from church. And then we set the table and we enjoy eating together. We pull out sparkling juice or a bottle of wine, and Kate baked a new cake recipe this week that was delicious. You cannot have the recipe. No, she'll give it to you. It was delicious, and we saved it for that day. We baked together. We put it together. We did all of that together, and then we enjoyed it together, and it was amazing. We loaded the dishwasher together, and we spent the next few hours resting, reading, playing games, sipping tea. Not me, the kids. They like to tea. And there was a puzzle. There was card games, and then we stepped back. And when our time was up, we stepped back into 6 days of work. Right? Time was up. We blew out the candles, and it was back to 6 days of work. But we had time together. We had that Sabbath break together. When we stepped back into this time, our life realigned with God's purposes and reoriented on his blessings, having just soaked up hours of grace together in his presence. What's a delight for you? Maybe it's a weekly phone call with a long-distance friend or family member, a FaceTime with somebody, a meal with your life group or with your neighbor or your roommate. I love records. So my family, for my birthday, they got me a new vintage record player. And they replaced the last one that was playing weird. Anyways, And so I love LPs. And so I can, on a Sunday, I can just go home and put on my favorite LP and just listen to that while we're either getting things ready or after lunch or whatever. I can just listen to good music because I love good music and I love it on a record. So that's something that I enjoy. And you're like, but wait, I thought we're talking about worshiping him today with Sabbath. Why are we talking about things I enjoy when it's a day for him? Does that seem a little counterintuitive? Things that I enjoy on a day that's meant to worship him? Well, last year, sorry, I've had this cold for 2 weeks, so hang on. Thanks. Last year at this same time, my kids just reminded me, it was this week last year, we were super blessed to be able to take our kids on a cruise. And so we took all of our kids, even the adult ones went, and we had all 7 of us on a cruise for 7 days. And it was awesome. First of all, it was awesome that everybody chose to go. That was also awesome. Everybody chose to go. Everybody chose to participate. Everybody had a good time. And while we were on the boat or on the beach or on this island or that beach or wherever we were, just soaking up the sun in February. Hang on, I'm wrestling my attitude to the ground. Okay. While we were soaking up the sun in February of last year, all together, Kate and I just sat back so many times and just watched our kids. We have 5 kids, so there's a lot to watch. And just coming and going from the ocean, or our older kids just laying and soaking up the sun on the beach or by the pool, or playing trivia on board, or just laying by all the things that they did to just go and have a great time for a week, take a break from their school and work and life together, just to go and enjoy life together. And I have this theory. I firmly believe that the Father loves watching his kids pause and rest and enjoy their lives. I'm going to say it again. I firmly believe that God the Father loves to watch his kids pause and rest and enjoy their lives. Enjoy what they were created for. Enjoy the good creation that he has made. I firmly believe that God enjoys it when you're enjoying your food together as a family. When you've made something that you love and you take that cake over to a neighbor and you share a slice with a cup of coffee or tea, and you hear about when you FaceTime your long lost aunt that you haven't spoken to. God loves that about your life. He loves when you're watching and enjoying the world around you instead of just cruising through your world with blinders on. He loves it when you pause and breathe and feast and rest and delight in your life. He loves that. Do you know what? When we first talked to our kids about going on this particular vacation, a couple of them were like, I don't know. Like, I know it sounds crazy, right? But they were just like, I don't know, on a boat, It was a little, but do you know they all had a blast? And I just want to say, do you know why? Because Kate and I know what is fun for our family. Kate and I are experts in our family. Kate and I are experts in our 5 kids. We know what's going to give them rest and delight and enjoyment. We know what food they like. I know what food, if I say, hey, we're going here for lunch, I know whose eyes are going to light up. Because I know who likes In-N-Out, who likes Chick-fil-A. Yeah, that's the extent of our lunch options right now as a family. It's like half of them are like Chick-fil-A, half of them are like In-N-Out. Anyway, so I know who's going to light up. Do you know, like, in the people around you, do you know, like, hey, if I brought this cup of coffee to that person today, I know what their face would do. Do you know that about somebody? See, that's what's being created when we talk about Sabbath, when we talk about making space, when we talk about resting in him, delighting in him. When we talk about these things, that's what God enjoys. He enjoys when you're loving your life. And he knows what's needed for you to enjoy your life. And he gave us Sabbath. As we stop and rest and delight, our hearts are turned toward him and life flows out of it. We're going to read a chunk of scripture here. out of Ezekiel chapter 47. This is a vision that Ezekiel the prophet had of the river of God, and I just want to talk about it. We're going to read it together. The man, that is a man in his vision. He's having a vision here. It's a long vision. It's chapters and chapters long, but we're in Ezekiel chapter 47, beginning in verse 1. Ezekiel says, "The man brought me back to the entrance of the temple, and I saw water coming out from under the threshold of the temple toward the east." For the temple faced east. The water was coming down from under the south side of the temple, south of the altar. Then he brought me out through the north gate and led me around to the outside to the outer gate, facing east, and water was flowing from the south side. As the man went eastward with a measuring line in his hand, he measured off 1,000 cubits. Then he led me through the water, and it was ankle deep. He measured off another 1,000 cubits and led me through the water, and it was knee deep. He measured off another 1,000 and led me through the water, and it was up to the waist. Are you still with me? He measured off another 1,000, but now it was a river that I could not cross because the water had risen and was deep enough to swim in, a river that no one could cross. He asked me, "Son of man, do you see this?" Then he led me back to the bank of the river. When I arrived there, I saw a great number of trees on each side of the river. And he said to me, "The water flows toward the eastern region and goes down into Arabah, where it enters the sea. When it empties into the sea, the water there becomes fresh. Swarms of living creatures will live wherever the river flows. There will be large numbers of fish because the water flows there and makes the salt water fresh." So where the river flows, everything will live. Where the river flows, everything will live. Fishermen will stand along the shore. From Engedi to Engalim, there'll be places for spreading nets. The fish will be many kinds. Like fish from the great sea, but the swamps and marshes will not become fresh. They'll be left for salt. Fruit trees of all kinds will grow on both banks of the river. Their leaves will not wither, nor will their fruit fail. Every month they will bear fruit because the water from the sanctuary flows to them. Their fruit will serve for food and their leaves for healing. Like, that was a long passage. What does that have to do with Sabbath? So the man brings him back to the entrance of the temple. And he has this vision of the river of God flowing out from the temple. And it's a picture of the presence of God bringing life, bringing healing, bringing provision and abundance and freshness, delight, as this river flows out from where? Where? The temple. It flows out from the temple and out to the sea. It starts at the temple, the central seat of worship for Israel. It's a beautiful picture of where right worship leads as the people of God. The city of God realigns their hearts and reorients their life toward God and the beauty of his holiness. And they set apart time and ritual and express the gratitude that they have to God in worship. I know, you're like, but where does Sabbath tie in? Well, if you have your Bible, flip back one chapter. So this vision happens in chapter 47. In the Bible, there's no chapter breaks in the original text. We just do chapters and addresses so we can find stuff. But if you flip back a chapter into chapter 46, verses 1 through 3, it says, "This is what the sovereign Lord says. The gate of the inner court facing east is to be shut on the 6 working days." The gates of the temple are supposed to be shut on the 6 working days. But on the Sabbath day and the day of the new moon, that's a feast, it's to be open. On the Sabbath day, it's to be open. The prince or the king is to enter from the outside and stand by the gatepost. The priests are to sacrifice the burnt offering and his fellowship offerings, and he is to bow down in worship at the threshold of the gateway and then go out. But the gate will not be shut until evening. So here, the gate is supposed to be closed. The gates of this temple are closed for 6 days, and then they're opened on the Sabbath, and the king and the people are supposed to come in, offer their sacrifices and worship at the threshold, and then from that place of the threshold of worship in the temple of God, what starts flowing out? A river. a river starts flowing out of the worship of the people, out into, and this goes from chapter 46 into chapter 47. This is just one long vision that he has. So he has this whole vision, and it's like, here's how you worship. Here's the sacrifices you're supposed to bring. Bring this many goats, bring this many sheep, bring this many oxen, bring this, and then it goes right into chapter 47. It says, the man brought me back, and I saw from the threshold of the temple a stream flowing out. And as that stream flowed out, do you know what happened as the stream flows out? It actually has first of all, Jerusalem has no river, right? So there's no river in Jerusalem. So this is clearly a prophetic vision. This temple also doesn't exist. This temple has not been built. This is a temple that's only in this vision. And in this vision, it flows out as a little trickle out of the threshold, and then it keeps going. And what happens as it goes? It gets deeper and wider. Can a river with no tributaries get deeper and wider as it goes? No. It can't just get deeper and wider. There can't be more water as the river goes. But that's what he's describing here. This is a miraculous abundance, a miraculous provision. And what's growing on either side? What's happening in the river? The river is full of life. And on either side of the river, there are trees growing. And the trees are for fruit, for eating, and leaves are for healing. This is a vision of the river of God. And what it reminds me of, this abundance and the life in the river, what it reminds me of is this passage we talked about it a few weeks back in Psalm 46. There's a river whose streams make glad the city of God. It says, God is in the midst of her and she will not be moved. So this river gets deeper and wider as it flows. No tributaries. Listen, if you desire, and downstream there's life and abundance. If you desire to bless the people around you, your coworkers, your roommates, your kids, your employer, your spouse, random encounters in your community, in your city. If you want to be a blessing to the world around you, if we want to be a blessing to the stream around us, to the community around us, the stream gets wider and wider as it flows out from us, not as we keep it in. It gets wider and wider. The presence of God gets more and more fulfilling, more and more powerful as it flows out from the temple. You know, sometimes I feel like I have just enough. Sometimes not enough for just what's right around me. It's that feeling. Do you ever feel that kind of pressure? Like, man, I have just enough time. I have just enough energy. I have just enough margin for me, for my wife and kids right now. Like, I don't have any other margin. I have no other room. I've got nothing else. And God is calling me to have enough, not just here around me, but downstream. How can that happen? His abundance, his life, his fruitfulness in my city, his glory seen in my city. I believe this Sabbath is one of the keys for the church to restore his glory to our cities. I said, I believe Sabbath is one of the keys that's going to restore the glory of God to our cities. When we have enough room, when we have enough margin to actually minister to somebody that I see around me. Man, sometimes I don't, do you do this? Do you ever just walk through somewhere and just don't look up because you just don't, if I see somebody that God's like, oh, go talk to that person. Just me? Okay. Never happens to you. Listen, I'm saying this is a confession. I don't have enough margin for that most days. But I believe Sabbath is designed by God to give us that kind of margin in our lives. Okay. Speeding up here. I mentioned Psalm 46. In Psalm 46, it says, cease striving and be still, know that I'm God, in verse 10. But then look up there at verse 4. See, down in verse 10, he says, be still, cease striving and know that I'm God. Stop, pause, and know that I'm God. But up before that, it says, there's a river whose streams make glad the city of God. These go together. When we cease striving, when we stop and reorient our lives as worship, we set our lives apart with a portion of our time, with a portion of our week. When we do that, there's a river that brings gladness, that brings blessing. Genesis chapter 2 says, he blessed the Sabbath day. He made it happy. He filled it with gladness. I believe the Sabbath for this church is about to be really restorative. I just want to speak that out prophetically. I believe in your household, whatever your household situation looks like, Sabbath, this thing is about to be really restorative for your soul, really restorative for this church. Because we cease, we stop, we rest, we delight, and we worship. Not with songs, not with singing, that can be a part of it, but just in the setting apart and making it holy, we worship. And there's a river of life and abundance in God there. Ruth Haley Barton said, I know what it's like to rest for hours until I have the energy to delight in something. I know what it's like to rest for hours until I have the energy to delight in something. Good food, a good book, a leisurely walk, a long-awaited conversation with someone I love. I know what it's like to feel joy and hope and peace flow back into my body and soul, though I had thought it might never come again. I know what it's like to see my home and my children through the Sabbath eyes of enjoyment. I know what it's like to have rest turn into delight, delight turn into gratitude, and gratitude into worship. That's the progression. When we rest, turns into delight. Delight turns into gratitude. I'm thankful for what God's done. That's the progression. Rest turns into delight. Delight turns into gratitude, and gratitude becomes worship. But that can only happen when I stop, when I pause, when I Sabbath. The beauty of a Sabbath practice is that with Sabbath, you're never more than 6 days away from rest, feast, and worship. I hope what you're hearing today has no condemnation in it. There's people from every background in here today. You might have a lot of feelings about this word Sabbath, or you might not think you have time, and that's fine. There is no judgment for me. Like I said, we're 2 weeks in. My family and I. We did the first 2 weeks of this series and didn't do anything. So you're good. Our hope is that as we begin to talk about this, as we begin to talk about practicing the way of Jesus, apprenticing to Jesus, becoming more like Jesus as true disciples, as true apprentices to Jesus, that we'd start these little things, that we start implementing these practices into our day-to-day life that are life-giving to you and that deepen our relationship with God. Amen? Above all, the purpose of Sabbath is to deepen our relationship with God by reorienting our lives toward Him, giving God a day or 3 hours, giving God time, beginning a practice, setting it aside, making it holy. So how do we do this? We're all in different situations in life, different seasons. At our life group this week, I was really enjoying in our life group that we had people from all different phases of life in our life group. It was awesome. And we were all just kind of talking about this, like, how do you do this? It was so cool to see people from all different seasons of their life, like just trying. It was amazing. How do you do this when you have babies at home or adult kids or roommates or you're living alone, you're empty nesters? How do you Sabbath when you're retired? That's a question. Don't say you're doing it just because you're not working. How do we do it? This is what we're asking ourselves. How do we Sabbath in our particular household in this season that we're in? We take it 1 week at a time, one step at a time. We try things. And let's stand together all over the room if you're able. Let's stand. Worship team, would you come? I hope what you hear in this series is that as we set aside, as we stop and and incorporate these practices, it's worship unto the Lord. When we set aside time, a day, hours, whatever it ends up being for you at the beginning, that's great. When we do that, it's worship unto the Lord, and our relationship with him grows and deepens. I just want to read Exodus chapter 16. In Exodus chapter 16, I just have a couple verses I want to pull out of there. He said to them, "This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is the day of Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord." So look at this. "So bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. Save whatever's left and keep it till morning." They're talking about manna. Collect it and bake what you want to bake, boil what you want to boil, keep it until morning. Bear in mind that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. The Lord has given you the Sabbath. He gives you bread for 2 days on the 6th day. So everyone is to stay home and not go out, and the people rested on the 7th day. I love that. Bake what you want to bake, boil what you want to boil, stay home. It's a day that's holy to the Lord. And this is what I want to say to you out of this. Say over us today. Just like his provision was there for Israel in the wilderness, he gave them 2 days of bread on one day. He has a way forward for you in the Sabbath as well. I don't know what that is. I can't speak to exactly what God's way forward for you, what your next step is, but I know that God has a way for you to step into Sabbath. And here's what I want to say. This is why it's important. Because when he gave the people the Sabbath, they had just come out of Egypt and slavery. They had been working and working and working and building and making bricks and building. They had been slaves in Egypt so for 400 years. So when he calls his people out of Egypt into the wilderness, they go from slavery in Egypt to freedom in the desert. And that might seem a little backwards to you. But what I want to say is he gave them this practice coming out of slavery because you know what he knew? He knew they needed a rest. He didn't need to teach them to work in the wilderness. He needed to teach them to rest in the wilderness. And so if you might be in a really, in an odd time, a difficult time, maybe you might even say a desert time. And I want to say to you that today, maybe in this desert time, in this wilderness time, it's to learn Sabbath. It's to learn to rest. I bet you know how to work. In America, we have no problem working 5 days, 6 days, 7 days a week. 12-hour days, we can do it. I bet he wants to teach us to rest. And I want to say something prophetically about Sabbath in this way, that this practice of Sabbath for the Israelites actually broke slavery off of them. This is one of the practices that when they implemented it, it broke slavery off of them because you see, slaves didn't take a break. They didn't take a day off. And so when God implements the Sabbath for them, it gave them something they didn't have as slaves, and that broke the power of slavery over them. I believe today God wants to break the power of slavery off of some of us in this room. Some strongholds